Hey sneak peekers, I'm Melody. Last Sunday I had the pleasure of interviewing the people behind Wildlife at South by Southwest. Wildlife is Oscar winners Elizabeth Chai and Jimmy Chin's newest documentary. So, let's see what they had to say. Did you mind telling me a little bit about your role in this film?
Right. I'm Bob Eisenhardt. I'm the editor and producer on the film. So it was my task to kind of pull all the material together once we got that. So it was a lot of footage, a lot of backstory of the footage because they had been such successful people before they met each other, Doug and Chris. And so we were trying to tell the story of where Doug came from, where Chris came from, the changes they went through, how they came together, and their mutual love for the natural world.
So how do you even begin to tackle so much footage when you're editing a documentary?
Well, I think we tried to tell the story kind of chronologically at first, to just try to get all the facts out there. And then we began to rework the material more thematically. So it was a question of what Chris was doing now after to try to finish their work together. So we followed that line and then wove in their backstories to that.
So you and the directors and the other producer and the cinematographer have all worked on previous works together. So how has it been coming back onto Wildlife now with the same crew?
Oh, well, it's great. I mean, I love working with these guys. So, and it's very easy. We kind of know how each other thinks at this point. So, you know, it's there's a lot of understanding. And we know what other people expect, what other people want, what they're looking for. So it makes working together much, much easier.
Are there any ways that you've approached this story differently to stories in the past?
I don't think so. Each one offers its own challenge. I mean, this one was a story about a lot of backstory, a lot of how they got together, what they had done before they met. So that was a difficult thing to do. And also the contemporary story of what Chris was doing at that moment to try to finish the parks. And there's this kind of metaphorical trip, memorial and metaphorical trip to the mountain that Chris was the mountain Doug named for Chris. That kind of is a through line through the story.
So as film students, do you have any advice for people trying to get into editing?
Well, I tell you that it's really hard, time-consuming, tedious, and very exciting. So hang in there is kind of the advice I have. I tell my students that it just takes a lot of work. You have to have a lot of patience.
All right, thank you. It was great talking to you. So you have an expansive background in mountaineering. So how has mountaineering influenced your efforts in conservationism?
Well, mountaineering is an endeavor that really requires you to learn how to put one foot in front of the other and to keep going. You have to be tenacious. And I brought that skill back from the high mountains to my life at sea level, and I applied it there. And it's worked. It's really been an important tool for me. But mountaineering also taught me something else that's a little more subtle but even more important. And that is that whatever your goal is, you're never going to make the last step until you make the first step. And you, as my mentor Doug Tompkins always early taught me, you got to commit to that first step and then figure it out as you go along.
So you mentioned that Doug Tompkins is one of your mentors. Can you speak more on how your relationship with Doug and Chris influenced your efforts in conservationism?
Well, Doug and I were mountaineering and adventure partners for decades. And around the campfire on our trips and wild places around the world, he was the one who led me towards an increasing realization about the environmental crisis that we're all facing. He knew about climate change before anybody was talking about it. He could see over the horizon line farther than anybody I've ever met. And I'll always be indebted to him for showing me the way to commit to conservation. He was my mentor in it in all ways.
Are there any parts of this documentary that you're particularly excited for people to see?
Well, the documentary itself is a love story, a story about the love between Chris and Doug Tompkins. And through it, it's how they use that love to address a mutual love to try and do whatever they could to save the world. So I'm hoping that people see this film, that it brings in a much wider audience, because who's not interested in a love story? And once they hear the love story between Doug and Chris Tompkins, they'll, like they did, decide to do something about this crisis that we all face. So I hope that's what people get out of the film.
I mean, this is one of the greatest untold stories of our time, I feel like. It's an incredible love story. It's about, Yvonne Chouinard, Doug Tompkins, Chris Tompkins, Rick Ridgeway, people who really defined an era and a way of life for many of us. And, I think we're really excited to tell a hopeful story, too, about the environment, which is hard to find these days.
So what has been one of the most gratifying parts of shooting this documentary for you?
I think the freedom to, when I decided that we should do this film, especially only with Jimmy and Chai, because they're very unique, I was very committed to giving them everything, all my 26 years of journals, all of our photography, everything, so that the story could be genuine. And I think that was one of the most powerful decisions. Yeah.
So you said that you shared all of everything that you had. So what are some of the more challenging parts of being so open in a documentary film?
I haven't found any of it challenging. It's important to see the tactile quality of people in a film, and you can't get that unless you really have access to their grief and their thoughts that come in the middle of the night and all that kind of stuff. That was important.
So speaking on background, you were the CEO of Patagonia before.
Yeah, I was there when we formed it. There were 6 of us.
That's incredible.
Then, I was the CEO for a very long time. And then I retired in 93 and went to meet up with Doug in Chile. And he had already bought a property by then, and off we went.
Could you tell me about your connection to Chile and Argentina?
The connection came through Doug because he was a ski racer. And he was training, like all the ski teams were doing, in the Southern Cone, the reverse seasons. And he had no money, but he would hitchhike around before and after the training season. And he fell in love with, and then he and Yvonne Chouinard, the owner of Patagonia, did an emblematic 6-month trip to go climb something in Argentina. And that did it. So many years later, he decided to change his life 180 degrees, and he looked down there for inspiration, and that's where he got started.
So overall, with nature and with yours and Doug's story, this is a story about love. So what do you hope that audiences will take away from this documentary?
Activism. That I would love it if Tompkins Conservation was a source of energy and inspiration to go out. Doesn't matter where you are, who you are, what you have, how much money you have, but go join this ecological movement that's happening around the world to change the end of our future story.
I mean, I think like all of our films, like this film also chronicles this kind of impossible story, and this idea that if you put your heart to it and you do the work, you can achieve something that's just outrageous. And I hope that people walk away inspired and hopeful about what they can do for the environment.